Okay, high-performing professionals, welcome back into the series on antifragility for what we've loosely been calling executives, but really we're talking legal field, medical, education, first responder, really anyone that's in high pressure, high performance, really anyone that's in high pressure, high performance, maybe high burnout professions, right? And up to this point, we've covered antifragility as well as some of the subcomponents of antifragility, what those are, how you build them up. And in this particular episode, we're moving on to the next one, which is psychological flexibility. So we're not going to cover too much of the science here. I'm going to throw it to Adam in just a second to detail what exactly psychological flexibility is. And then we'll take a scenario or two and talk about what that looks like in practical terms. But if you want to better understand kind of the three categories we looked at in this episode in terms of the science, which is acceptance, framing, and sort of this flexible thinking, if you will, what we call counterfactual thinking, then go back to the main podcast, the Anti-Fragile podcast, and you can nerd out on that. This is going to be really scenario-based. So we'll get into those scenarios in just a second, but before we do, Adam, break it down for us in really practical terms. What do we mean by psychological flexibility? What does that look like on a behavioral level?
In the most basic sense, it's the ability to fully contact the present moment and one's thoughts and one's feelings without any kind of needless defense. So, in being present in what the actual situation and what it affords, but also persisting or changing behavior based upon one's defined values and defined goals.
It's about adaptability. It's about being able to work into the context or the situation effectively. Okay, so the real question is, where does psychological flexibility most frequently show up in terms of a need, right? Where can it really be impactful? And so thinking through a short list of situations, I want to throw these out to you, Adam, see if you agree, and then let's pick one or two and have at it a little bit. I've got budget challenges, and so that could lead to, tightened budgets, layoffs, all sorts of different impacts. I've got poor performance reviews, making a significant mistake on a project, which is a little different than a performance review, actually being fired or laid off. If you're a leader or a manager, maybe discontent among a team, right? Kind of infighting politics, whatever it might be. So any of these potential situations could really create like a shifting context that you have to quickly identify, be aware of, and adapt to in values-aligned ways, right? Anything I'm missing there that you think should be included, or any particular scenario you want to take on?
No, I think decision-making under certainty is a big one here. I think that, obviously, but I love the idea of, leadership and that idea of adaptability under leadership, and obviously managing stress and well-being all kind of falls under that umbrella.
Okay, well, let's go with what you just said, which is decision-making, and I think we can add to it, and managing, right, stress, expectations, pressure, et cetera, right, during uncertainties specifically, right? So can you think of like a scenario where maybe you've helped a client work through something like that?
In particular, I'm dealing with now, working with management of a professional sports team, is just dealing with some issues where someone needs to get fired because of incompetence or malfeasance, and the disruption that it's causing on the team, and understanding that some of these decisions aren't being made necessarily with complete information, and there's going to be unpredictable outcomes that's going to have a trickle down effect on the actual performance on the field.
Yeah, and so just so we're clear, for those who kind of know Adam's background, and he does mental performance for the Washington Nationals, but we're not talking about the Nationals here, right? We're talking about actually a different sport, actually a different sex, if you will, but really, really similar problems that you see really across a lot of these spaces. And so I think it's a really good one to take on. There's going to be a position change, right? Whether it's an employee, teammate, whatever it might be. That change is creating a ton of uncertainty. That uncertainty tends to breed even more stress and anxiety and can spiral out, not to mention be environmental, right? So walk us through it. How did you get started, or maybe you're in the middle of it, with that particular high-level kind of athletics executive in terms of helping them start to adapt to an uncertain context?
I think the first situation is dealing with the acceptance of it. And the idea is that there's going to be situations that are unpleasant for the team and it's not great timing, and recognizing that it could have a really, unpredictable outcomes. It could go either way, but the idea is accepting what is rather than sitting there and saying what I could have done or should have done that got me in this place to begin with.
It makes me think of just kind of like a core foundational idea in psychology. If you can name it, you can at least more likely tame it, right? And so you're talking about, listen, it is what it is. Let's talk about it. Let's be explicit. Let's be open about it. And then we can talk about what happens there on both an individual or team or community level. But it starts with awareness of what's happening and an acceptance of what's happening, right? What comes next?
And I would also expand on that too, because part of that acceptance, I think, is not just internally for the leader, but it's also creating a culture where there's open feedback and there's enough psychological safety that people are sharing their feelings, and not being so defensive where we're immediately dismissing or creating judgment on other people's experience of the situation, because everybody's experiencing these situations different and they have maybe a different relationship with the person that's got to go.
Sure. So again, though, as we kind of move forward to the next steps, how do you continue working with this executive then?
I think the next phase is cognitive fusion. I think this is a big one here, because I think it's really important to understand that we can't get overly attached to who we are or necessarily what we think we should be doing, as opposed to responding actively in the present based upon the situation as it stands. So there's a separation between me being a great leader moving forward as opposed to me making a big mistake, or maybe I made the wrong hire or taking this on in such a way where there's a narrative that starts to develop that could bring you to a darker place that's not necessarily going to allow us to move forward with the right decision at the right time.
So tell the folks listening how you might go about that. How do you, to use your analogy, sort of pick the right fish to facilitate that diffusive process?
I think this is important to have. This is why it's so important to talk, right? This idea of talk therapy in the therapeutic world is important, but even in executive coaching, the idea is we need to put our internal feelings, what's making what is otherwise implicit, explicit. Let's talk this through. Let's start to brainstorm. Let's understand what narratives are actually being said internally, maybe that one's not even aware of, to bring them to light, so that if we have to, we could reframe them, we could challenge them, we could make it so that what is otherwise a threatening situation then becomes a challenge, and then that gives us a little bit more agency and control of the situation.
Yeah. So you just mentioned acceptance, reframing, challenging, different skills we can take, but lay out for them the central analogy first. What I reference, pick the right fish. You got to walk them through what that looks like or what's it analogous to.
Yeah, it's the same idea. It's the idea is being very clear on what our values are and what we're looking for, and that means maybe revisiting what the mission of the club is and what kind of culture we're trying to create here, and making sure that we're attaching ourselves to those thoughts and those feelings that are in line with what we already know, what we've agreed upon as important to us or valuable to us as an organization or even as a leader. So a good analogy that I use, and a couple of ways we could do this, but that if you're a trout fisherman and you're in a stream and there are a lot of fish that exist in that stream, you want to focus on the trout. And they're going to be bass and they're going to be sunfish, but the idea is right now they're not going to help us or move us forward. We want to fill our bag with trout, and such we use the right fishing gear that's going to attract trout. We keep our focus on the holes in which trout live, but at the same time we're present, we're in the water, we're experiencing it fully.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece you just said there, because your description suggests like you're not ignoring the other fish. You're not suppressing the other fish. You're not trying to pretend they're not there, right? You're acknowledging and accepting everything, to go back to this sort of idea of being non-judgmental, right? It is what it is. It feels how it feels. What trout, so to speak, can I focus on and select? Can I make my reality out of that's going to help me stay values aligned in this moment, right?
Exactly. And those other fish can literally swim around your feet, but they're going to actually capture our attention.
From that point on, it really comes down to committed action, which really is going to come from visualizing or anticipating situations ahead of time, trying to really predict sort of probable outcomes, plan for those outcomes, right? Visualize those outcomes. Of course, you're not going to be able to plan for or respond to all of them, but if you can have in mind before kind of shit hits the fan, What are my values, right? What are my processes for when things get unpleasant that allow me to stay aware of my values, and then plan accordingly so that you can move forward and sustain those values aligned, committed actions, right? Now, again, lots more tools in the main podcast on framing and challenging, like Adam mentioned, and counterfactual thinking. So be sure to check it out, and we'll follow up with the newsletter with all the training videos, workbooks, and additional resources. As always, thanks for joining us.